Okay, so that's what this one is particularly about. It's really useful to kind of break down what the broad sectors are, and then within each of those sectors, what the subparts are.
So when we go by jurisdiction, are we gonna get this same circle?
We don't. We get this, which is literally by jurisdiction, by literally the cities. So this is a picture for 2019. You can do it for these other years too, but of course there are far fewer cities. It's just by county, in fact.
Okay.
So 2019 is the only one that is for cities. I find this to be the least useful of them because, well, Lake Forest Park is somewhere off on the side here.
Yeah.
It should be per capita, right? I mean, that's
Right. And so
gonna be more comparable.
you're right. Here it is. So here's per capita over time. Okay. And so we can do Lake Forest Park here. And here I actually do find the comparison to King County useful. So let me just do that. All right. So this is the one that I can't. Yeah, I can't do that on this one. You can sometimes call it both on the same screen, but yeah. But in fact, basically for Lake Forest Park, we can get it to per cap, which is 7.6
7.6 metric tons per person.
Yep. Per year.
So, Tracy, you can
Yes.
get the table of per capita by jurisdiction if you go to the very next tab to the right.
Got it.
There's a table, so you can't really see it. It's, yeah, now you can put in King County and Lake Forest Park.
Right.
On
And
that
there's our side by side comparisons. I think maybe this is what you were looking for, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So tell me, so this says that in King County, per capita in King County, that doesn't make sense. How would I read that?
Okay, so the way that you read it is at the bottom, of course.
Uh-huh.
Total 12.818 metric tons per person in King County per year versus in Lake Forest Park 7.5.
So why is that?
Because we have a lot less in the way of this thing called built environment
Oh.
emissions. So our electricity, as we have noted, is pretty
Yeah.
clean. The natural gas is comparable, but this thing called land use, which I'm not really sure what it is, because basically it has to do, as you can see, with agriculture and tree loss and things like that. We don't have any of that stuff. I have a suspicion it means what is the land use conversion to? In other words, is the land being left alone or is the land basically being converted into development? That would, of course, make a big difference. And we don't have any of that because we're all completely built anyway. So.
Which is 401.
and you can also see very clearly that we've just been assigned a generic refrigerants.
Right.
You know, if our refrigerant proportion is exact same as the rest of King County, that means that we're on a par with the entirety of King County, including all of the manufacturing, all of the, you know, large scale, you name it. And that's why I'm looking at refrigerants on an actual Lake Forest Park basis as something that we can, you know, actually nail down.
Hi, Matt. We're just looking through, Tracy and Ann have both been able to open this mysterious
Power BI database.
Power BI, and we're kind of looking through it for Lake Forest Park. Our objective in this meeting is kind of just to figure out what's in here so we can talk to everybody at the next meeting about what's in here. So that you're
Yeah. and-
right with us. So this chart right here is a comparison between King County and Lake Forest Park on a per capita
Right.
carbon
2019,
emissions,
right?
2019.
Right.
yeah.
So let me go to the top. Yeah, you can see one column's King County and one column's Lake Forest. Something else is.
So off-road vehicles is also exactly the same as the rest of King County, which says to me that was just, you know,
Right. A generic number.
it's a generic number. We're slapping it on every capita.
Right.
How many capita do you have?
Right.
Do the math.
Well, you know, you can only do so much, I think, with any
Well,
of these.
yeah, I'm not faulting them. I'm saying
But
we
we're-
have
I
to
think-
choose.
Looking at the things where there's big differences, like and compare, you know, so letting people know that we don't have commercial and industrial,
Right.
you know, like the rest of King County, you know, what makes us different if you're trying to show people. But I'm thinking
Right.
about how do you communicate with the public
Yeah.
here?
And-
What can you use from this?
And my problem with this has always been the fact that consumption-based data isn't in here. So you see a solid waste generation disposal. That is literally the trucks taking solid waste to the landfill and it rotting. It's basically literally, what does it take for the sewage system, electricity-wise, to pump things to a place where they can be treated? So it's not really taking into account that whole life cycle.
Right.
Creation of CO2, right? So that's what the consumption based one does, but they didn't put that in here.
Okay,
So that's
that's the limitation.
a limitation.
Severe limitation.
Okay, so just so that I can get to my next meeting, I want to show you the last three, which are really interesting to me. These are basically the ones that have to do with the built environment. And so for Lake Forest Park, this is King County, right? That's why there's a time series of data on all these things. But for Lake Forest Park, it's just 2019, right? And then specifically what I was looking at was for Brian, the fuel oil. Check this out. You can actually literally get the total metric tons of CO2 they think, that is, King County thinks, the average Lake Forest Park as a whole is putting out in terms of putting heating on fuel oil or residential propane. And the question is basically, once we apply the conversion factor they do to go from CO2 emitted back to gallons of oil burned, will it be comparable to what Brian's discovered, right? That's to me is the interesting question.
How far are you, Brian, from an answer to that?
Not very far. Sorry, I really haven't gotten any further than last time Tracy and I talked.
I didn't expect, it seems like a big project.
Right, but at least basically you now have something you can compare against, which is kind of nice. Yeah. All right.
Well, is it,
But having that kind of information helps us understand how much we should put value we should place in the data set, right?
is it possible to, I'm asking you this, Cory, is it possible to take the Lake Forest Park pages out of this and print them out for us? Or make them into a document that we could send
I
out?
can screenshot them. You can't download it. I don't know. I have no idea.
Well,
It's an Excel spreadsheet.
Anne, could you work on that?
I mean, in theory, there's an export.
Oh,
And you can export these as PDFs in theory. I have not tried it because I have nothing I can print this out on, so.
you can save it.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. I mean, I was just thinking that part of, for me, the difficulty of this, and I'm sorry to keep saying this, but I'm overwhelmed by the data.
Yeah.
And it's everybody's data, so if we get just ours on a thing,
Right.
on a PDF even.
And the last two things really quickly are the transportation. Right, and again, basically they do the total here, pie chart here, the different sectors, which they do blow up here, right, which is kind of nice.
Is this Lake Forest Park?
This is Lake Forest Park, and to Ann's point about the off-road emissions, I think it's interesting that we had the same as the average King County, which suggests that it's a generic number. I have not gone as far as to check whether the sizes, the proportions of these colored areas are the same between us and King County, which would lend more evidence towards that approach that they're using then.
Well, I think they've made at least one modification, Tracy, and that's just, by looking at the data and comparing what we're doing with King County, I think they are recognizing, for example, that most of our electricity comes from Seattle City Light and not Puget Sound Energy.
Sure.
And so we're, basically, I think they have already integrated what's your power source?
Does it explain that anywhere?
Yeah, there are two big PDF files that none of us have had the time to read.
But so those we can actually read without this fancy software.
Right.
And you sent that to us.
Right.
Okay, I'll take it.
I can also send that email out again to everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just alert people that they cannot actually access this Power BI thing unless they download the app. And if they already have Microsoft everything, they can do a 60-day free trial of it. And if they don't already have Microsoft stuff, they're going to have to spend a fair amount of money or go to somebody's house who has it.
And don't do it.
And don't do it. Yeah.
My initial assessment is that it's not for the, the average person on the committee, getting this far into the weeds is jumping the gun a bit.
I agree. I'm happy to be able to play with it because I'm curious to learn how the tool works.
So,
So for me, it's a useful opportunity, but I think it would be, unless you love it.
I'm gonna jump in here. What is it that we need to know from these documents to proceed ahead? That's the question I want the answer to. What do we need? So that was what I was thinking. If we could just get PDFs of this page, that would be helpful to us. But what else do we need to know from this data? Is it this data or the other data that we can actually open in an Excel spreadsheet?
I think what we need to know is that this map is not our terrain. That the actual challenges faced by Lake Forest Park in doing something useful will differ slightly from, well, being in the same general ballpark. Our emphasis may differ slightly from what's suggested by this because of factors like managing off-road vehicles, which.
So we have a bunch of things that we think we should be focusing on, right, in terms of encouraging people to reduce. That change their behavior.
Well, yeah, and we think it's, I mean.
But I mean, whatever it is, we
Yeah,
have,
yes.
and so then we have some data, this is kind of a starting point, right? That we, if you wanted to say, here's where we're starting, here's where we want to get to, right? That's the whole point, is where do we want, we want numbers that show that we've reduced.
Uh-huh.
And so just, I think trying to frame our questions around, you know, in terms of what's our plan? And just starting with some of these things we already know, and then looking more granularly at this thing and saying, what else can we do? Right, we already have some things outlined for, you know,
Transportation and buildings and so on.
and specific things
Yeah.
that we would
Yeah.
do. And an idea of what that would take. Right?
Yeah, in the most general.
Because
sense, yeah.
if you look at all of this stuff, I mean, I can't wrap my brain around all this stuff. But start with the things we can wrap our brain around. I don't know, but Anne, maybe you have a greater capacity.
Well, one of the things that we're trying to do with our data team is come up with something that is actually a little bit more functional. Because I think we have some really big goals and specific paths we can use. And I think we need to always work within the concept of showing people that progress is achievable, that this is not so big and so complex that we should throw up our arms and do nothing, which I'm afraid when I look at some of the stuff on that, it's big and complex. So if we look, for example, at let's take the fuel oil. That's one discrete area. People who are heating their homes using oil. Okay, we should be able to get from our county assessor the number of homes who rely, the actual exact number of homes that rely on home heating oil. And we'll be able to track that over time as people move off of home heating oil and back onto forced air electric or what have you. We will be able to look specifically. We know that 10 years ago, there were no EVs in Lake Forest Park. We have data for this last year on the total number of fuel vehicles broken down by class and fuel type. We'll be able to track that going forward as people convert.
Right. And that's the story that you can take to people. You can show them, well, here's 2018 and here's, you can use King County, right? Or whatever you want. If we have Lake Forest Park, and you can say, because there's been a lot of transition, right, from fuel oil to other things over the last 10 years.
Yeah, there has.
So you could actually make a calculation and show people, this is the impact of that.
Yes.
To our city in terms of CO2.
Correct. So we're working on that kind of an approach. And then as we get people on board with the process, then I expect we will see, people voluntarily choosing to buy an electric leaf blower instead of a gas powered leaf blower, or an electric lawnmower instead of a gas powered lawnmower. That's the smaller stuff, but I think the big goal is just to remind people that small changes in their life, when we look at aviation, I'm sure that's just, aviation for all of King County. I'm looking forward to reading the documentation of how they come up with that number. For our city, for residents in our city, it's more of a, think about it, every time you get on a Zoom meeting like this, with your company colleagues in New York City, that's X number of tons of carbon saved.
I think with some things like aviation, we really have to get people to vote for people that are gonna push for changes in the aviation industry. Because that's where the big impact will be, right? Changes in policy at that level, not getting somebody to not take the flight to visit their grandchildren, right?
And
It's
if you,
really-
well, if you look at the wedge analysis, a whole lot of the savings in the wedge analysis come from national and state and regional of what do you call it in
Policy change.
policy changes from at the national state. So for instance,
I'm
the
gonna close this for a minute and open that wedge. The other piece.
that's
Okay,
fine.
Okay, you can keep talking. I just
Uh,
wanted to.
And this
explain.
is also going to be with things like converting off of natural gas. You know, individuals will do it one house at a time, but there will be regional incentives to do it, and that will be helpful.
Okay, the other, I think this is helpful, and I think if we, so what I've gotten out of this and is that the data that we have from the county that is targeted, is named Lake Forest Park, is really, for the most part, an assessment assigned to us of the county's whole kicking caboodle.
Yeah,
So that's what I want to get out of this. Now, what we're gonna ask, I've asked Corey to take, I don't know how she's gonna do it, but take pictures of these and create a compilation of the data for Lake Forest Park from this particular piece for us. And now we want to look at the wedge and the other piece. I don't know what you have here. No, the geographic one. This one. We'll put Seattle up there. I mean, put Lake Forest.
okay, not the
This is just-
consumption based, but the geographic based. Got it.
Yeah, just this is that. This is for my experience with King County is that they think this wedge tool is just like a magic thing. I mean, it explains everything. It can explain some things, but I think it's not immediately apparent what it actually is. And it takes some talking through. So this is what we're gonna try and get Lake Forest Park on here.
There you go. You got it.
So this is, again, you have to go back to the README, I think, but it begins to talk about, you know, if we do nothing, and then if we do some things, and if other jurisdictions above the red line, I believe, is what they think is going to happen because policymakers in other jurisdictions are taking action to.
Yeah. So this is all the colored stuff.
Okay.
So if you look at everything that has a colored tone on it, through that purple line, that's kind of like all the state and regional policy changes will get us about halfway there. And then there's that gray zone down below. And that gray zone down below is what we have to try to get after. That's really all we're going over that bit. You know, what we can do at a municipal level and an individual household level is in that gray zone, because the rest of it's going to kind of come along with all the rest of these policy changes.
Okay. So if all the stuff that happens with the county and the federal government and the state government actually happens, then we still have a big chunk that we're assigned to figure out.
Yeah, and that chunk we're assigned to figure out is the difference between, for example, a person who has an old car right now. I'll use me as an example. We have a car that's not only old enough to drink, it's old enough to vote.
Mm.
And we could choose to replace that with a gasoline powered vehicle and wait until 2030 and still use that gasoline powered vehicle for the next 20 years. And we won't be able to replace it again with a gasoline powered vehicle, but we could do so now and then run that vehicle for 20 years. Or we could choose to replace it with an electric vehicle and implement that change voluntarily in advance of the mandates. And that would make a dent in our forecasted emissions reductions because
Right.
it didn't wait.
Right,
Is this part of that transit software also?
no.
Oh,
this we
okay,
can
so
all
we
read.
can go find this.
We can,
information.
and so people can
Yeah.
find it, but I thought it would be,
I'm just wondering what they've thought a lot about, right,
Yeah.
how to create the ground and have probably pointed to certain things in that gray area that we in the county can do, right? They've already done that for us, I imagine, or is that not true?
actually, this is what Lake Forest Park can do. This is
Right,
larger.
okay,
stuff.
larger,
Yeah,
yeah,
but
but
I-
is there some text
um,
that speaks to that? So we don't have to like reinvent the wheel,
yes.
probably those reports.
Let's see, new construction and beyond will consume 70% less energy than used in the King County baseline. So these are some assumptions about it, on and on and on assumptions.
It seems like there's two parts to what we're gonna do. One is we're trying, all those other, some of the things we're talking about already doing are probably wrapped into some of the policy changes that will happen. So we're gonna be in alignment with that. And then there's these other group of things that are gonna address the big gap. So, just trying to parse those two things out
Right.
is a task.
Is it a tech? Well,
I
that's a
mean, maybe you
question.
guys have a better idea of
Well,
what those differences are.
Well, this green one that I'm pointing to here is, what? I can't see it.
Fuel standards or,
No, Washington internal combustion engine ban.
okay, so that's the impacts of banning combustion engines. And whatever assumptions they made
Right.
around the impact of that.
Right.
That for a certain number of years, then we'll have electric vehicles.
Right, so that's that wedge, and I don't think we have to deal with that wedge. Is that
Right,
right?
but that impacts the effect of our encouraging people to go electric,
Uh-huh.
right? So then I'm just
Right.
trying to figure out,
What's in the gray?
when we tell
Yeah.
people we're attacking this gray area, what is the mechanism for addressing what's in the gray area? What are we?
Okay, do we need to answer? I have a couple of questions. First off, it sounds like you feel compelled to answer that immediately. I don't.
No, I don't.
Okay,
I'm just putting that out
Um,
there as a way of framing. what
so
we're
I'm
doing.
going to point out that let's look at that internal combustion ban. Okay, let's say we could wave a wand and require that everybody in Lake Forest Park swap out their vehicle for an electric vehicle tomorrow. Okay, that would put us, actually, we'd have hit our targets 10 years ahead of time. So,
But Ann, if you look down below where I'm showing down here, I think this is our gray area. And that we would electrify these are the things, we'd electrify new buildings, we'd reduce energy use in the existing
Yep.
buildings.
Okay,
yep,
We'd reduce the passenger vehicles, we'd plant more trees.
yep. So that electrify passenger vehicles, for instance, is one of the things that's in here. And we can front load. To the degree we front load, we're into the gray area. All these, increasing local solar isn't actually as big a deal for us as it will be. Like, this is one of the risks of the generic application, is when we throw increased solar on a city that is primarily using hydropower, that actually doesn't change our carbon footprint. But electrifying buildings that use fossil fuel does. So I think we use this to focus ourselves effectively on what can we do locally, where can we make progress locally, and that ties into, are there any things we want to do in our building code or our planning documents? As we've mentioned, City of Seattle, City of Shoreline have banned additional natural gas hookups.
Okay, so how does that help us? How does this information on this chart and on the other charts help us? Right? Does it change how we do things? Or is it we just need to focus on these things down here?
I think it informs us more than it changes us. I don't think anything I don't see anything in this so far that adds significantly to our understanding of our local community. And in some cases, we're going to be stuck explaining to people why it doesn't exactly apply to our community.
Okay.
So, my homework for tonight is to read those 2 PDFs until I can recite them to you.
Okay.
I've got these things open and I've gone through the wedge analyses enough now that I'm pretty comfortable that I know what I'm looking for in those PDF documents. Because that's how I develop my questions. Why would this make sense? And I think this informs, but it also has the potential to be confusing if we do not frame it correctly to the city council and our fellow citizens, as understanding the difference between the construct that this is necessarily creating and the actual community that we live in here.
All right. So what should we do to help our colleagues who aren't in this meeting get ready for the next meeting? We should encourage them to
Read the PDFs.
Look at the wedge and look at the background information and understand what is in that gray area and what is in the other for the wedge one.
Okay.
And then for the other one that we were talking about before that, just, the questions I had would probably be do some homework. But the README files that help you understand what you're looking at.
Okay. Those of you who haven't said anything, do you have anything that you want to share with us? Matt, your room is amazing.
It's like changing colors.
Colors.
Or is that just an illusion?
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's got fancy Wi-Fi light bulbs.
Oh.
Woo.
Yeah. So does this make any sense at all? Is it worth spending our time I think it's worth spending our time trying to figure it out a little bit, but not.
So in terms of, because I sit with communication group, right? That's where I think most of my time is. And that's the lens that I'm looking at this data from, is how are we going to use it or what parts of it are going to be useful when you talk to the average person on the street? Not a lot of it. It's the overall idea and concept. The granular stuff that you're looking at is good for us in terms of accounting, if people want to do that data group. For me, it's like helping people understand where we are and how we can get to our goal.
Okay.
And that's the construct that I'm constructing in my head for communicating with other people.
Okay.
So I think there's 2 uses of it. One is as the data group and accounting for things and saying, how can we reduce this and how much can we reduce it? And maybe that's for the city council too. I don't know what they want to see. Tracy's not here, so we can't ask him. So and they'll probably want to see more detailed information, but then there's the general public, and it's different. I think it's different what you want to present to those groups.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
It's gonna be a lot of outreach, educational outreach.
It's a lot of education. But let me just say, an aside from this is that we've had amazing turnout from the survey.
Oh, good.
We've had all of the answers. Corey says already 210 people have responded. And I've just sent out a couple more things to apartment buildings asking them. I don't know, is anybody here from in the Civic Club?
I am. I can get it.
Okay, would you?
Yeah, yeah.
send it to- That was one of the ones I didn't know, and I'll bring a list to the communications committee and we'll see if we can find more. But I think it couldn't have gone out at a better time for,
Damn.
because there was smoke and it was hot and it was, so the garden club is very eager to fill it out so they can write damn bunnies on every page. But
You know those stink bugs? You guys have those stink bugs in your house? Anybody?
Steampunks have been big this year, you gotta admit.
Yeah, there's.
They have had a banner year.
Yeah, I had never seen so many in my life, but then there's some chat in the thing, in the community chat about. They see them in Eastern Washington, sorry, when there's a long dry period and warmer, and then they get up there. So I don't know if you guys know anything about this, but I was like, oh, cool, somebody knows something about why we have this infestation in my house.
All right, so what I'm gonna try and do is write up what I think we were saying and encouraging people to do. Focus, Corey's gonna send out that whole thing again. And also figure out how you can take those pages from Lake Forest Park from the VI document. And maybe just screenshots. And put that together in a PDF document and then send that out. And I'm going to encourage people to do the README and focus on the wedge analysis. But anything else you want to read, you can, but don't expect that we can have a conversation about it. We'll have a conversation about the README document and the wedge analysis, I think. And then what Corey has from the document that we can't read, but pull that out on Lake Forest Park. And then I think the question we want to ask, and help me if this is not right, but I think the question is, how does this help us write our report and reach out to the community? Those kind of things that.
I guess there was the idea that we would be presenting the greenhouse gas inventory to the town.
Yeah.
So maybe we need to revisit that idea, that concept, what is it of this that you would want to present to them?
Yeah, I canceled that meeting on the 12th because I couldn't understand the data. So
Hey, and would you have any time on Monday to just kind of meet and
Yes, I would. Hang on. Yeah, that's a good Monday. What's a good time for you?
actually I'm pretty good all day. Except for between 2 and 3. I've got office hours, but
How about 10 in the morning?
10 in the morning, yeah, that works. Yeah.
Okay, we'll get it done and dusted. I'll send you an invite and link, okay?
Yeah, that'd be great.
all right, are there any other comments that we need to check in on?
I just
tell you
want to kind of, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna thank people and leave the meeting, so go ahead.
I think what we're seeing is very much what we expected.
Yeah.
It's, if anything came through at all, it would probably be at a countywide level and then prorated down to Lake Forest Park in a perfectly reasonable and logical fashion, but inexact in ways that can make it feel hopeless to us to accomplish what we're being asked, because what they're asking is not exactly what we can ask or should ask of ourselves. So I think being in a position to be able to translate this so that people do feel empowered and in control and as though their contributions are meaningful will be extremely helpful.
Yeah,
Because-
that's actually why I wanted to meet. And I think we've got to really find the data that is probably the most paramount to really think about. Because yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with you. I'm feeling I just can't trust any of these numbers. I don't know. It just seems to me that they're grabbing at straws. I'm not.
I think they're doing a perfectly good job of calculating, but there's two ways you can come at it. You can come at it from each, and I think we hit this before you were able to join the meeting, but they could have done a detailed survey of each community and then done a survey of the entirety of King County and said, okay, the portions that aren't accounted for by the communities are now allocated to unincorporated King County on some basis. Or with a finite budget and a finite amount of time, they could just do the county portion. And then they can allocate all of that to all of King County using some reasonable protocol.
Right.
And that's what they did. And that's what we expected they do. And we're not surprised, but we were pretty sure that it would be, the classic, it fits like a saddle on a cow analysis.
Yeah.
It fits like a saddle on a cow.
It's just as you know, I want to work with empirical data, and I just so it's like what do you want us to do with this? Anyways, but yeah, that's why I'll let me have a really good look at it this weekend, and then Monday, yeah, let's see if we can really fine tune what we want to.
And if anybody wants to join you, can they just give you a call in?
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be, I'll certainly contact all the data team, and, people want to join in, that's fine. But I think, as always, I was unable to have our normal data team meeting on Monday because I had the appointment with the cemetery. And that has to come first right now. And we knew we were having this meeting today anyway. And so I bailed and said, fine, we'll meet on Wednesday. but I would like to follow up with our teammates and just make sure we're making steady progress. I have identified who we can talk to about solid waste in our community, and I will be learning what level of detail we can get on that. So, each specific task, we've got a portion to human beings, and we just got to knock them off one at a time. Get our arms around real data, real measurables that matter in our real community.
Sure.
It seems like if you ask you guys work with specific questions in specific sectors or specific things and played with that and made some calculations, you might feel better about it instead of trying to like attack the entire database, which is impossible. If you wanted to play with numbers, find something that you can actually quantify, that you feel good about the numbers.
Yeah, there's some really exact stuff that we can quantify and feel good about. And we can count the number of USTs being used for heating oil in Lake Forest Park, and we cannot count the number of airline miles being traveled by the citizens each year.
Yeah, I mean, if you guys feel like you have a good handle on something, then you can compare it to their numbers, but I don't think you should feel like you have to match up.
Oh, no, we're going to be aware of this.
Yeah.
But we're not going to be, we're not going to use it as guidance more than it is useful to do so.
We're
going to use the useful bits and not use, it's like there are parts of this report that are really useful.
You might be able to use their approach to projecting into the future if you try to look at, how much can we, and their wedge diagram is the model they use to predict, in 10 years, here's where we could get, trying to incorporate some of their logic in your thinking.
Well, counting widgets and seeing the reduction in the count is pretty common analytic method.
Right, but I mean, they're making projections. And so if you guys are trying to do that too, thank God I'm not happy to do that.
I'm less concerned with trying to do massive projection. Yeah, there's some very simple stuff that we can make that's basic algebra stuff.
Right, but also just because we have our communications hat on, it can be like a report card. This much.
That's a good analogy. We could plan to do a report card periodically. That could be the city's plan. Our plan is a report card of how we're doing, and so people can see progress. I mean, that would be a nice communication tool.
That's the whole. Remembering kind of how we came at the whole data question. It has been, what can we measure? Just overall, what can we measure? Which of those measurements are actually useful to us? How can we collect the data and report them in a way that is inspirational to the community? So, I mean, we've talked about like fuel oil, we've talked about EVs. We can also talk about canopy coverage. That's something that's measurable. And maybe I can't project exactly how many tons of CO2 are being removed from the atmosphere, but canopy coverage is measurable. The city's in the process of getting another really good survey done, and that's something that's reportable and trackable and monitorable.
Maybe Anne, and maybe you and Brian could bring us like a list of what you think are the 7 measurable things, so we can just sort of move off the other stuff. I don't know, whatever, maybe 7 isn't, I can count to 7, not actually. So, but there'd be something, so we're not, because I find that we just kept, it gets more and more expansive, yeah.
If we
So
just-
it's not, here,
But
okay.
I mean, if
One
it
of
is
the things
urgent,
that I
it-
think y'all need to consider. Data team is going to play with data, data team like data. It's okay that you don't like data. It's okay that you don't play with all the data. We will be able to select subsets that are useful for communication purposes, but data team doesn't have to restrict their sandbox to
But
only the grains of sand that are interesting to everybody else.
I guess, no, not at all, but I would like to be able to ask a question to help with the communication piece, right? If I'm trying to figure out how to talk to people, then if we can ask a question of the data, of you guys who have the data in hand, like what, if you're saying the top 7 or a list of specific things that we can address as a community, that you guys already have in your heads, I think. But if you could make a table, and then if we could see how we're gonna monitor that progress over time, like tree canopy, if there's a plan for monitoring tree canopy over the next 10 years, what is that plan? So we just have a summary of that information. That would be, I think, really helpful for the rest of the team.
Okay, we have presented that within the last few months, and we can certainly
It's like
update our
totally that-
presentation
yeah.
to, but
It's-
this is, the table that I've emailed y'all is
okay, I'll
more
look-
complicated, but it's comprehensive. I gave you everything that we're looking at in a broad sense, and I've made it clear that some of these are dead ends. We're not going to follow them up. You know,
Okay.
it's-
All right, well, I'm gonna, thank you for coming, all of you. I really appreciate this. This is very helpful, I think. And I think we can move on, and when the whole group gets together, I know what I'm thinking on the agenda is reports from people, and then from each of the groups that we have operating, and then a quick reports, and then a little bit of focus on this. And also the book club.
Yeah, that's where we're talking about it on Thursday with the
Okay.
communication team.
Okay,
So we'll have a more advanced
terrific.
process.
Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah,
So-
I think it's just, measure for measure. We'll get through this.
Okay. Thank you. And
So.
okay, how do we get out of it?
Thanks.